One might argue that if Neva had simply held her tongue, the Alpha King would never have kissed her, and the moon bond would have gone on sleeping for the rest of both their lives. But then again, if the king had ever once bothered to look north, to the frozen march where his wardens starved and stood their watch on his behalf, she'd have had nothing to shout about, and no earthly reason to be standing 3 paces from his throne with her chin up and her temper off its leash. So really, when a person followed the thread all the way back to the beginning, the whole catastrophe was his fault. Every last silver strand of it. Neva would spend a great many months being certain of this. It was, as things turned out, only half true, which in matters of the heart is very nearly the worst amount a thing can be. She had not come to Duskhold to make history. She had come to make a nuisance of herself, which was different, and considerably more within her rights. Warden of the Deadfall March, they called her, though the title dressed the work up finer than it deserved. It meant she kept the top of the world from falling in on the rest of it. 100 leagues of black pine and colder rock, where the old things still hunted, and where the king's supplies arrived when they arrived, at all, in the wrong number and the wrong month. Neva was not a talker. She was not a courtier. She had precisely one good coat, and she had worn it to stand in the Hall of Reckonings on the single day a year. The crown pretended to listen. She had meant to be brief. She had rehearsed brief the whole way south. Then the steward at the dais had glanced at her ledger. 5 nights of her life, tallied in her own cramped hand, and said, without looking up, "The march is a difficult posting. The crown regrets the hardship," and moved to call the next petitioner, and something in Neva that had been holding very still for a very long time simply let go. "The crown regrets," she repeated. "Does it? How much does it regret?" "Exactly, because I can put a number on it. 40 wardens' rations requisitioned for the winter. 30 came. I can name the 11 men those 10 missing crates would have kept alive if you'd like the list." I brought the list. The hall went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when everyone in it has decided to enjoy watching someone die. "You order the watchfires doubled," she went on, "because the going quiet only fed her, and in the same sealed letter you have the timber to pay for them. You send 3 commands a season, none of them agree, everyone arrives too late to matter, and when a man freezes on a wall you built too tall to hold, you write regret on a page and call the accounts square. That isn't hardship, my lords. Hardship is weather. This is neglect. And neglect has an author." "Careful," murmured a voice from the dais. A dry voice, unhurried, faintly amused. "You're very close to naming him." She had not, until that moment, properly looked at the throne. The Alpha King of Helveth was younger than his coins made him, and far more at ease. Severin sat with one boot crossed over his knee, and his crown pushed slightly back off his brow like a hat he'd forgotten he was wearing, and he watched her with pale gray eyes that did not match the lazy set of his mouth at all. The eyes were doing arithmetic, the mouth was only there to distract from it. "Then I'll name him," Neva said. "The man at the top of it. A king who cannot count his own arrows has no business counting on his people's love." The hall inhaled as one animal. Severin rose. He came down off the dais without hurry, and the closer he came the more the room seemed to tilt toward him, every wolf in it turning like iron filings to a lodestone. Every wolf but her, and she was too angry to lean. He stopped near enough that she had to look up, and she hated that, and she did it anyway. "You'd say all that to my face," he said. "It was not quite a question. I am saying it to your face. So you are." A smile ghosted across his mouth and vanished. "The trouble, Warden, is that I can't argue with you." He said it lightly, but there was something underneath it, something that flickered and was gone. "Not here. Not without proving every word you've said, and I can't agree with you either, or by nightfall every lord in this room will have a list of his own." He tilted his head. "You've built me a very tidy trap. Do you know that? You clever, furious creature. There's no way out of this argument. That leaves me a king." "That sounds..." Neva said, like your problem. It does, rather. And then quietly, almost to himself, forgive me, this is the only door left. She did not understand what he meant until he closed the last of the distance and kissed her. It was not gentle, and it was not tender. It was a decision. A king ending an argument, the only way an argument like this one could be ended, with the whole court watching and no words left that wouldn't cost him. She had half a heartbeat to be furious about it. Then the moonbond woke, and fury became the smallest thing in the room. It came up through the floor. It came up through her, a cord of cold silver light snapping taut between her breastbone and his, blooming outward, until it lit the undersides of the vaulted stone. Somewhere above the hall, high in the dark, the great bells of the moon temple began to ring, though no hand had touched them, and no hand in living memory had needed to. Her wolf threw back its head inside her and keened a sound she felt in her teeth. And worse, far worse, his feelings poured down the new-made cord into her, and she knew them for his, the instant they arrived. Distinct and foreign and undeniable. Shock. First, clean and total. And then, underneath the shock, running deep and hidden and utterly unmasked, a bright vein of raw animal terror, not of her, of what had just happened. This isn't supposed to be real, she thought, with the last clear thought she had. Why would the moon choose? Then the silver light took the rest of the hall, and the sound took the light, and Neva went down into the white and heard nothing at all. She woke certain of three things: that she was not dead, that she deeply wished otherwise, and that someone very close by would not stop breathing so loudly. She's up. The breathing resolved into Bram, the youngest of the March Wardens, hovering over her cot with his whole honest face folded into worry. Neva, Neva, are you? Should I fetch someone? I'll fetch someone. Fetch me quiet, she rasped. The room was small and clean, and not hers. Good linen, a narrow window, the gray light of a morning she'd apparently misplaced. A guest cell in the body of dusk hold itself, which was wrong, because wardens of the march slept in the barracks by the stables when they slept in the palace at all. She turned her head and found Tamsin leaning in the doorframe with her arms crossed, watching her the way you watch a rock slide decide where it's going to stop. How much do you remember? Tamsin said. It was not gentle either. Tamsin was never gentle, which was, most days, why Neva loved her. I remember the steward. I remember the list. The rest came in pieces that would not lie flat. The tilt of the room toward a rising king, pale gray eyes doing sums. There's no way out of this argument that leaves me a king. And then, cold silver, and bells and... He kissed me, Neva said, and sat straight up so fast, the room lurched. The king kissed me. That's the small part, said Tamsin. There's a large part. The bells rang. Neva. Bram's voice had gone hushed and strange. The voice a boy uses for the sacred on their own. Nobody rang them. The whole hall saw the light come up out of the two of you, Silver, floor to roof. Tamsin saw it. I saw it. He swallowed. It was a moon bond. A true one. There hasn't been one witnessed at dusk hold since the old king's mother, and that's 60 years. The word landed in her and would not fit anywhere. A moon bond. Not the ordinary mate pull that came to lucky wolves in the ordinary way. The moon bond, the rare and holy one out of the temple's oldest verses. The one the oracles taught was the goddess herself reaching down to knot two souls together with her own hands. Wolves prayed their whole lives for the mate pull. Nobody prayed for a moon bond. You did not pray for lightning to choose your particular tree. No, Neva said. Neva, no, not it isn't. She pressed the heels of her hands to her breastbone, where a thread she could not see sat warm and taut beneath the bone, thrumming faintly, like something asleep and breathing. It was real. She could feel that it was real, and the feeling made no sense at all, and so she did the only sensible thing and refused it. There's been a mistake, or a trick, some temple slight to it, some show. The moon does not reach down out of 60 years of nothing to nod itself to a warden off the deadfall march who owns one coat. Her voice cracked, and she despised the crack. Look who you're saying it chose. It chose wrong. Which means it didn't choose at all. Neither of them answered her, and the silence stretched until it was the loudest thing in the room. The door opened, without a knock. Warden Commander Merrick filled it. A big gray slab of a man who had stared down a winter that killed 40 and never once blinked, and who now, looking at her, looked afraid. That, more than the bells, more than the cord under her ribs, was what finally frightened Neva. "Tell me the whole palace has it wrong," Merrick said, low. "Tell me, my warden did not stand up in the Hall of Reckonings and get herself moon-bonded to the King of Helveth in front of the entire court." "Sir?" Her mouth had gone dry. "He kissed me. I didn't. I know you didn't. That's not going to matter to a single soul in this building, and you need to understand why before you say another word to anyone." He came in and shut the door and lowered his voice under it. "A moon bond is temple business. Sacred law, over the crown's law, over mine, over yours. And there are two ways this room is going to be read, and neither of them is the poor woman had it done to her." He held up one thick finger. "Either the goddess herself put her hand on a frontier warden and lifted her up beside the king, a miracle, in which case every lord who spent 10 years angling a daughter toward that throne now has a reason to want you quietly dead. A second finger, or the bond is false, witched, a low-born nobody who worked some right to snare a king and counterfeit the holiest sign the temple owns." His hand dropped. "That one they don't kill you quietly for, Neva. That one's heresy. They burn it." The wound in her spoke up then, cold and familiar and almost relieved, because it had been saying the same thing her whole life. "Of course, it's the false one. Of course. What did you think, that you were chosen? You? For something holy? Then it's simple," she heard herself say, and her voice came out flat and steady, the voice she used on a bad ledge, with a long drop under it. "I'll tell them the truth. It's a mistake. Sever it, whatever the right is, and send me home to the snow. And the king can go back to regretting things on paper." Merrick looked at her with something that was almost pity. "The High Oracle has already been sent for," he said. "Vesna herself is coming down from the temple to judge it, and Neva." He stopped and started again more carefully. "The woman who raised you is going to walk in here and decide whether the goddess touched you or you counterfeited her. I'd think very hard, before then, about which answer she wants to be true." Somewhere far above them, the bells began again. But slow this time, and struck by human hands, a measured tolling that meant procession, that meant the temple was on the move. Neva's heart climbed her throat. And then, under the tolling, she heard something that did not belong to it at all. Not the massed tread of a temple procession coming down, one set of footsteps. Unhurried, easy. Coming up through the palace toward her door, the way a man walks who has never once had to arrive anywhere before he chose to. Merrick went very still. "That's not the oracle," he said quietly. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The oracle wasn't here yet. The king was. The door opened, and Severin walked into the little gray room, and the little gray room rearranged itself around him. Neva felt it in her skin before she'd finished turning, the air pulling taut, her own wolf surging up under her ribs, to stand at attention whether she willed it or no. She had known he was the king. Yesterday, furious, she'd looked at a lazy man on a throne and seen an argument to win. This was not that man. This was what the throne had been for, a true alpha at the full weight of himself, filling the doorway and then the room, and every knee in it wanting to bend on its own account. Bram's did. Tamsin's jaw went tight with the effort of keeping hers from it. Only Neva stayed on her feet, and she suspected the bond of it. The cord under her breastbone had gone warm and bright the instant he crossed the sill, pushing back against the pressure of him like a hand braced on a hand. "Warden Neva." He said her name, as if he'd been saying it for years. You're awake. Good. You gave the whole court a fright. Some of them were almost sincere about it. Your Majesty. Merrick got there first, bowing, putting his big body a half step in front of her, without seeming to. Forgive her. Whatever happened in the hall, my warden is a plain soldier of the march, loyal to the crown, and she'd no more work a right against you than work a right. Severin's brows rose, all mild astonishment. Commander, you wound me. Is that the tale going around downstairs that this poor woman witched me? He looked at Neva, and for half a breath, the pale gray eyes went sharp and direct and entirely unlazy, and the bond carried her a flat pulse of something that was not amusement at all. Then the mask slid back down. How disappointing. I'd thought my court had some poetry in it. Your Majesty, please don't jest, Merrick said. The temple is coming to judge the bond false. If they do, then they'll be wrong, Severin said pleasantly, and I'll tell them so myself. The room stopped. It's real, Commander. He said it to Merrick, but he was watching Neva, and he said it the way a man lays down a card he has decided to win with. You saw the light, you heard the bells, no one rang. So did 400 witnesses, half of them lords who'd give an arm for a reason to call it a lie, and not one of them can, because it isn't. The goddess reached down into my hall of reckonings and bound me to this woman in front of the world, a slow smile. Who am I to argue with the moon? Liar, Neva thought, and was so startled by the certainty of it that she nearly said it aloud, because she'd felt him, hadn't she? In the half-second the bond tore open, she'd felt the shock, and under it, the terror. And nowhere in any of it, not a single thread, had she felt anything that belonged to a man being blessed. Whatever the moon had done to the two of them yesterday, Severine had wanted it no more than she had, and he was standing here in front of witnesses swearing he'd wanted it all along, which meant he had a reason, which meant this holy accident was, to the King of Helveth, a door, and he was already deciding what to move through it. You can't mean to keep it, Merrick said. Faint Majesty, she's a warden. Low-born. No house. No! She named my arrows in open court and dared me to correct her. Severin's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. 60 years the goddess held her hand, Commander, and when she finally spent it, she spent it on the one wolf in that hall who'd tell me the truth to my face and count the cost afterward. Frankly, I think that's the most sense the moon has shown in a generation. He turned the full gray weight of his attention on Neva, and the bond pulled toward him like a tide. Unless the warden means to stand there and tell all these good people the goddess made a mistake. And there it was, the trap she'd built for him yesterday, handed back to her wearing a bow. Deny it. And she called the holiest sign the temple owned a fraud, heresy, the burning kind. Allow it. And a lie she could feel humming false under her own ribs became, in front of witnesses, the truth. He'd left her exactly one answer, the same way she'd left him one yesterday, and some small traitor part of her, cold and grudging, admired how thoroughly she'd then outmaneuvered. "No, Your Majesty," she said through her teeth. "No mistake, wonderful." He clapped his hands once, and the sacred weight of him folded itself back into the easy man from the throne, so smoothly it was almost obscene. "Commander, I'll want her quartered properly. She's not sleeping by the horses now, whatever she's used to, and I'll want a word with her alone before the oracle arrives. Bond business," he smiled. "Terribly private." Merrick hesitated, one heartbeat too long, then bowed. Because a commander of the march did not have the standing to do anything else. And he went, and Tamsin dragged a white-faced Bram out after him, and the latch dropped, and Neva was alone with the king who had turned her whole life over like a card on a table. "Whatever you're doing," she said the moment the door shut, "I want no part of it. I insulted you. You ended it the cruelest way you could think of, and now the goddess, or bad luck, has hung the two of us together. Sever it. You're the king. Tell the oracle to cut it. Send me back to the snow, and I'll never say your name again." Severin didn't answer at once. He crossed to the narrow window and looked down at something in the yard below, and when he spoke, the easiness had thinned, just at the edges. "You said yesterday that a king ought to look north." The gray eyes came back to her, and this time, the mask didn't quite cover what was under it. "Congratulations, Warden, he's looking. He's going to be looking at you very closely for a long while yet, and I'd think hard, before the Oracle gets here, about whether you truly want to be somewhere I'm not able to see. Is that a threat?" "No." Something crossed his face then, real and quickly hidden. That same buried thing the bond had shown her in the hall, the fear that lived under all the charm. "It's the kindest offer I've made anyone in a year. Wear something they can't sneer at tonight. I'll send for you at the 8th bell." He was at the door, already, unhurried, a man who arrived and left exactly when he chose. "And Neva, when the Oracle asks you what you felt in the hall," at the end, he paused, hand on the latch, not looking back. "Do yourself a kindness, lie." Then he was gone, and the apology, and the questions, and the why, all of it sat unspoken in her mouth, with nowhere left to go. The High Oracle came down from her temple at the 8th bell, and all of Duskhold rearranged itself to be caught being reverent. Neva had not seen Vesna in 3 years. The march was a long way from the goddess's house, and she was unready for how the sight of her landed. The High Oracle of the Moon was a small woman gone silver all over, hair, robe, and the pale blind film across her left eye. She crossed the king's own receiving hall, as though the king were a guest in hers. 26 years ago, she had found a nameless pup half frozen in a snowbank at the edge of the world and given her a name, a fire, and a reason to keep her frost-bitten ears. Every good thing Neva had ever been handed had come out of this woman's hands. So when Vesna reached her and took Neva's scarred face between 2 dry palms and said, "There you are," in the voice from 10,000 childhood nights, Neva's throat shut, and 3 hard years of the march slid off her like snow off a warm roof. "Little wolf," the Oracle murmured, for her alone, "what a great deal of noise you've made." "I didn't mean to. It came out very small." "No, you never do." Then the grandmother folded herself away, and the office came down over her like a hood, and the hall went silent. "Kneel, child. Let me see what the goddess has done to you." The rite was old and wordless. Vesna laid 2 fingers flat against Neva's breastbone, over the thrumming cord, and closed her good eye, and for a long moment the only sound in the hall was 400 wolves not breathing. Neva felt the Oracle's attention travel down the bond like a finger down a taut string. Testing, listening, she waited for Vesna to frown. She waited, with a shameful flicker of hope, for the old woman to open her eye and say, "Counterfeit," so that all of this could end. Vesna opened her eye and said, "It is real, it is true, and it is whole," and the goddess said it herself. "I have not felt its like since I was a girl." She turned to the hall, and her thin voice carried to every stone. "Let no one name it false, on pain of the goddess's own displeasure. The moon has bound the king of Halveth to this daughter of the march. It is a blessing." The hall breathed out. Somewhere a lord who had spent a decade steering a niece toward the throne made a sound like a man stepping on a nail. And Neva, kneeling, felt the floor of her whole life quietly give way, because she had been sure. She had felt the lie of it, humming under her own ribs. And the one person on earth who had never lied to her had just laid a hand on it and called it holy. "So, the lie is in you," the old cold voice offered helpfully. "You want it false, because you can't bear to be the one it chose. That's all this is. That's all you are. Come to me before the moon fills, little wolf," Vesna said softly, cupping her cheek once more as the court dispersed. "There are things a bonded woman must be taught, and I would rather it were me who taught you." A pause, the blind eye pale and steady. "Trust the goddess. She does not reach so far for nothing." Neva did not notice. Then, How quickly the oracle had blessed a thing she had come prepared to burn, she would notice later. Later, she would notice a great many things. The king kept her near him after that. His bonded, by sacred law, which no one could gainsay now that the temple had spoken. He walked her the long way back through the palace himself, unhurried, telling her the names of dead kings in the portraits, as though she'd asked, she had not asked. She was cataloguing exits. It was on the colonnade above the moon garden, past the last torch, that her ears caught it, a scrape of stone on leather where no one should be standing. She had him against the wall before she'd decided to move, one hand fisted in the front of his coat, hauling him sideways and down. The crossbow bolt passed through the space his throat had occupied and buried itself in a marble urn, with a sound like a dropped axe. "Down," she breathed. "Stay behind me. Don't be a king for the next 2 minutes." She was already between him and the dark, blade out of her boot and into her hand, her wolf up and singing murder. One archer high, reloading. She heard the ratchet, and then footsteps, more than one set, unhurried, folding back into the garden, not fleeing, withdrawing, trained, then nothing. The night closed over the quiet like water. Neva held her crouch, blood roaring until she was certain. She read the ground the way she'd read a dozen ambushes on the march. The nest chosen for its line and its exit both. The withdrawal clean and paced, no dropped weapon, no shout. Bandits ran, grudges got loud. This had been done to a plan by people, paid enough to be patient and trained enough to leave nothing behind. Someone with coin, and standing, and reason to want a young king in the ground. Then she turned on him, furious with relief. "You're not shaking," she said. "Someone just put a bolt where your head was, and you're standing there like it's weather." Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't the first time." And those weren't footpads. Footpads don't retreat in order. For half a breath, something true surfaced in Severin's face, old, and tired and afraid. And then the easy mask slid up over it like ice over a pond. "You do keep a man interesting, Warden," he said lightly, brushing marble dust from his sleeve. "Most women would have swooned. You costed out my killers. Your Majesty." She didn't move. "Is someone trying to kill you?" He looked at her for a long moment, and she felt him, through the bond, decide not to lie and choose silence. Instead, which was somehow worse. "Go to bed, Neva," he said gently. "You'll want your wits about you here. Everyone will." He did not answer the question, and the not answering was answer enough, and it followed her all the way to a sleep she didn't find until dawn. For the better part of a fortnight, Neva set herself to learning what the king was hiding, because it was the only sane response to a man who could be shot at in his own garden and call it weather. She was good at watching. It was half her trade, reading a snowfield for the one shadow that shouldn't move, a tree line for the wrongness that meant something was already inside it. So she watched Severin, the way she'd watch Bad Country. She learned his day. She learned which counselors made his shoulders drop and which made the muscle in his jaw stand out. She learned that he slept badly, that the guards on his door were changed on a schedule only. He set, and that twice more in that fortnight there were incidents. A girth strap cut half through, a dish sent back untouched, that everyone around him agreed, very quickly and very loudly, to call accidents. And she learned that he was watching something too. She caught him at it once, late, through a door left carelessly ajar. The king of Halveth bent over a spread of ledgers by a single candle, not the posture of a man reading, but of a man hunting. A map of the march, under his hand, columns of figures, a finger tracing a line of coin out of the crown's own treasury, north and east, toward the high pale house on the hill where the bells hung, toward the temple. She told herself she had misread it. She was very good at reading, and she told herself that anyway, because the alternative had Vesna's name in it. She took the worry to Tamsin, because Tamsin could be trusted to be unkind with the truth. They sat in the barracks Neva no longer slept in, and Tamsin listened to all of it, the ledgers, the coin running north, the too quick blessing, with her arms crossed and her mouth flat. "You want me to tell you you're seeing shapes in the dark?" Tamsin said at last. "I won't. You're the best set of eyes on the march. You don't see shapes. But hear yourself, Neva. You're about to accuse the woman who pulled you out of a snowbank of bleeding the kingdom on the word of a king who kissed you to win a fight and won't say who's hunting him." She leaned in. "Be sure. Whatever this is, don't move on it until you're the kind of sure you'd stake a life on. Because it won't be your life if you're wrong. It'll be hers or his." It was good advice, and Neva hated it, and she kept it. The trouble was that the more she watched him for danger, the more she simply watched him. The bond did not help. It was thickening as the moon fattened toward full. She could feel it drawing tight under her ribs, a warm, insistent thread that hummed when he was near and ached, low and physical, when he was too long gone. Bond sickness, the temple verses, called it leave a moon bond denied, and it turned on its own bearers, wore them thin. She woke in the nights with her hand pressed flat to her own breastbone, reaching down a cord toward a man she was trying to convict. He made it worse on purpose. She was almost sure of it. The cut girth had put him on the stones one gray morning, harder than he let the watching court believe, and it fell to his bonded sacred law again, endlessly convenient to see to the gash along his ribs. She did it in a cold antechamber, with a needle and steady hands, and a great deal of resolve, and the resolve lasted until she laid her palm flat on his bare side to hold the wound closed. His heart was going hard under her hand, harder than a scratch could account for, and the bond lit up the whole length of her arm and told her without her leave that the King of Halveth was not thinking about his ribs at all. "You could try wincing," she said. "Do you have something to say?" "For the look of it, I find I can't spare the attention," he said, and did not smile, and she pushed the needle through and refused to look at his face. "You've gone quiet again," he said one evening. She'd been sent to walk the north wall with him, his idea, endlessly. His ideas, and the wind off the mountains, had teeth in it. He shrugged out of his own coat and dropped it round her shoulders before she could refuse, and his knuckles grazed the side of her throat as he settled it, and every nerve she owned lit from jaw to fingertips. "I'm working," she managed. "You're strategizing. I can always tell." He leaned on the parapet, entirely too pleased. "Go on. Ask me the thing you've been circling all night. I'll even answer 1 in 4. "Why did you claim the bond?" she said, "when you didn't want it?" The pleasure went out of him, just for a beat, and the bond carried her a clean, cold pulse of the truth beneath it, not guilt, grief. "Because it was the only roof I had to put over your head before someone burned it down," he said quietly. "You'll notice no one's tried to burn you yet." He straightened, mask back in place, and offered her his arm as though the last 10 seconds hadn't happened. "That's your one. Come. It's cold, and I find I'd rather you didn't freeze on my account. I've had enough of people doing that." She did not take his arm. But, walking back, in the dark, in his too warm coat, that smelled of him, Neva caught herself doing a thing she had not done in years. A thing the march had beaten out of her. She caught herself hoping he'd meant it. And she was so angry at the hope, and so unable to put it down, that she barely noticed when the wanting him, gone quietly turned into something she had no safe name for at all. "The thing about a moon bond," the verses said, "is that it will not be starved forever. Deny it long enough and it stops asking." It came due in the armory 3 nights before the moon filled. She had gone there to be alone, with the smell of oil and steel, the one honest place in the whole gilded pile, and he had found her, because he always found her, no counselors trailing him, no ledgers. Just Severine in the low lamplight, sitting himself down on the bench across from her like he'd worn a groove in it, saying nothing, watching her hands work a whetstone down a blade she did not need to sharpen. "You should go," she said, voice rough. "Whatever this is, I can't keep doing it. Every day you won't tell me the truth and you won't leave me be. The bond gets worse, and I lie awake reaching for a man I'm half sure is using me. and I can't." The stone slipped. She set it down before her hands could shame her further. "Tell me it's a scheme. Tell me you need a sword you can trust. And this is how you keep it close. Tell me anything with a reason in it. Because I am not built to want things I can't have, and you are teaching me to want, and it will break something in me that doesn't mend." He was quiet for a moment, then low, not teasing at all. "And if there's no scheme, there's always a scheme. You're a king." "Not tonight." He stood. He came round the bench slowly, the way you close on something that might bolt, and did not stop until she had to tip her chin to hold his eyes. "You think the moon made a mistake," he said. "I know you do. I can feel you thinking it all the time, like a splinter. So let me tell you the one thing I'm certain of in all of this." His voice dropped to almost nothing. "Tell me to go and I'll go, Neva, right now, and never trouble you again. Or," the smallest space between the words, "ask me to prove it." The armory was very quiet. Her pulse was not. "Prove it," she heard herself say. He kissed her, and this time no one had forced it, and no argument needed ending, and every careful, watchful thing in her went white and silent at once. His hands slid into her hair. His mouth was warm and certain and unhurried, and there was no court to perform for, and no bells, but the ones already ringing under her own ribs. And then the bond, patient and starved, and no longer asking, simply opened, and his feeling poured down it into her, not the flat pulses she'd stolen through the mask, but all of it, the whole flood, want and relief, and a tenderness so undefended it frightened her more than the wanting did. She made a sound against his mouth she'd have died of, if she'd had a single thought left to be ashamed with, because this was the thing she'd braced against her whole life and never once believed in. Not a man who valued her sword. Not a man who found her useful. A man whose plain helpless wanting was aimed impossibly at her. And the bond would not let her call it a lie, because she was standing inside his heart, and it was true all the way down. The old cold voice tried out of long habit to tell her a man like this could not want a woman like her, and for the first time in 26 years, it had nothing to stand on. There was no mistaking whose face sat at the center of him. Her back met the cool stone of the wall, and his hands came up to frame her face, and she let herself be held there, the wet stone forgotten on the floor. He said her name once, ragged, against her jaw. Not Warden, not the court's careful courtesy, just Neva, like it was the only word he had left. And she felt the truth of it come down the bond and settle warm behind her ribs. She fisted a hand in his collar and kept him close. Past sense, past strategy, past the 26 years of keeping every soft thing under lock. And for a moment there was nothing in the whole guttering lamp world but the steady warmth of him and the bond singing between them. And somewhere very far off, the sane part of her noted what the verses had promised. Fed like this, the bond would set the moment the moon came full, 3 nights off. It would knot itself so deep that no gentle rite could loosen it again. Only the old, severing the verses named, in a whisper that tore 2 souls apart and left both hollow for the rest of their days. Tied for good, near enough, for the length of both their lives. She waited to be afraid of that. The fear did not come. That, more than anything, told her how far past saving she already was. She was still telling herself she'd stop in a moment when the horns sounded from the gatehouse. Long, formal, twice, and Severin went still against her. "Torvale," he breathed against her hair, and she felt the mask flow back into him even before he'd stepped away, felt the king close over the man like water over a stone. The envoy's a day early. He pressed his brow to hers, once, and when he drew back, his eyes had gone somewhere cold and calculating and afraid. "Whatever happens at this alliance, Neva, whatever you see me do, stay close, and trust nothing you're told, unless you're told it by me." Then, he was gone toward the sound of the horn, straightening his collar into a king's as he went, and she stood alone in the armory, with her heart slamming and her mouth still warm. "Whatever you see me do." It was a strange thing to leave a woman with 3 breaths after a kiss. Like that, she pressed her fingers to her lips and made herself think like a warden and not like a woman with a half-set bond singing under her ribs. An alliance meant a bargain. The young king had something Torvale wanted badly enough to travel for, and someone close was killing to be sure he never lived to strike it. Coin running north toward the bells. Vesna's too quick blessing. A man who told her to trust nothing, she was told, the way a man only did when he already knew the lie was coming. The first cold thread of dread wound up through everything the bond had just laid bare, and Neva, who had never in her life been able to leave a wrong thing alone, went to wash the oil from her hands and find out what walked in behind that horn. The march did not hold balls, it held funerals, and the occasional grim wedding, and once a year, a bonfire, where the survivors got quietly drunk and agreed not to name who the winter had taken. So Neva arrived at the Torvale reception knowing exactly how to guard one and nothing whatever about standing inside one, and the moon-blue silk they had poured her into fit like someone else's skin. Torvale had come in force. King Aldos was a broad old wolf, with a gray muzzle and careful eyes, and his daughter, the Princess Marin, was slight and quiet and watched the room the way Neva watched tree lines. An alliance hung in the air over all of it, unspoken and enormous. Halveth and Torvale, 2 crowns and 1 border, and a young king who needed the old one's spears at his back more than he would ever say aloud. Half the court had come, not for Torvale, but for her to weigh the snowbank foundling. The goddess had sat beside the throne and decide over the wine. Whether she was a miracle, she felt it as she crossed the room. The flick of eyes down her plain scarred hands and up again, and kept her chin level and let them look. On the march, she had faced worse than a room full of silk with its claws out. Severin found her across the hall, and his whole face did something quiet and private that she felt come down the bond before she saw it. "You look," he said, reaching her, "like something the goddess did on purpose." "I look like I'm wearing a curtain? Then? It's the finest curtain in the room, and it's mine, and I mean to walk it past every lord who spent this morning urging me to set it aside for a better match." He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm before she could refuse, and steered her through the crowd with an ease she resented and leaned into anyway, because the bond had ached all day and eased the moment she was against his side. He took her out onto a colonnade, where the music thinned and the cold garden air came up sweet, and for a while neither of them spoke. "You hate this," she said, watching him watch the dancers through the arch. He laughed, surprised out of himself. "Is it so plain? To me it is." She'd learned the shape of his real smiles now in the armory dark, and this was not one. "You've had the court smile on since the horn. It doesn't reach anywhere." The false smile faltered, and what came up underneath it looked tired to the bone. "I've been doing it since I was 19, he said. The smiling, the being easy. Give them a king who looks like nothing touches him and they don't look too hard at everything that does. Some days I can't tell whether that makes me clever or just—" He stopped, shook his head. "Or just what?" "Alone," he said, very low as if the word had got out before he could stop it. She reached up without deciding, too, and laid her scarred hand against his jaw. His breath caught. The whole performance came off him all at once, like a man setting down a pack he'd carried so long he'd forgotten the weight. "The man under all of it," she said quietly. "The one you think no one would want if they saw him. I've seen him. I like him better than the king." Something broke open behind his eyes, and then the bond broke open with it. It was not like the armory. The armory had been a door opening. This was the ground itself moving. The moon stood full over the garden, and the thread beneath her ribs pulled suddenly, violently tight. And then it did not loosen. It knotted, fused, went from a cord that could be cut to a thing grown into the bone of her, and she felt the same happen in him in the same instant. felt his shock and her own become a single startled feeling, with no seam where one ended. Set. Not past all cutting. The verses knew one right grim enough, even for that. But past all gentle undoing. Now knotted into the bone, 2 lives, made one for the length of both. Oh, Severin breathed, wide-eyed. Neva, I think it just a servant appeared at the mouth of the colonnade. Silver tray on one palm. 2 cups of wine, dark as blood in the moonlight. Your Majesty, he murmured, and offered it. Severin, still looking at her, still half inside the miracle, reached for a cup. Every instinct Neva owned stood straight up and screamed. She didn't think. Her hand shot out and knocked the cup from his fingers. It shattered on the stone. Don't. She had his wrist in an iron grip. Under the wine. Do you smell it? She watched his nostrils flare, watched him catch the bitter thread beneath the fruit. The flat green wrongness she'd learned off poisoned wells in bad country. Mercy root, or near it. That cup was meant to stop your heart, my lord, on the happiest night of your reign, in front of a foreign crown. The color left his face. The servant was already gone into the crowd. And then Severin did the thing she would spend a long time failing to forgive. His hand came over hers, and his face went, not afraid, calculating. You'll tell no one, he said, quiet and hard. Not Merrick, not the watch, no one. Someone just, there is a foreign king 30 feet away, he cut in, deciding tonight whether Halveth is strong enough to be worth an alliance. If it gets out that I was nearly murdered, under my own roof, at my own table, he'll have his answer, and it isn't the one that keeps my people out of a war. He drew a breath and the mask flowed back up over all of it, seamless, terrible. Trust me just this once. I know exactly what I'm doing. Do you? The fear had made her cruel. He only pressed his mouth to her temple, quick and grateful, and murmured, Wait for me. I'll be back before you've missed me. Then he stepped back into the light, king again, smiling for Torvale, and left her alone on the colonnade with broken glass and spreading wine and a set bond singing in her chest. She gave him a 30 count. Then she followed. She kept to the edges, the way the march had taught her. And she watched him smile and nod and deflect. And she watched the smile drop from his face the instant he stepped through a side door, and her stomach dropped with it. Down 2 flights, into the dark of the record rooms. A door clicking shut behind him. She crossed to it very quietly, and opened it. Severin stood behind a clerk's long table, a locked box, forced open in front of him, a sheaf of temple ledgers in his hand. He looked up. For a long, silent moment, neither of them moved. Neva, he said, very calm, very steady. This is not what it looks like. Severin never paused. In all the weeks she'd known him, he had always held the answer before she'd finished the question. Now he stood with the temple's own ledgers in his fist, and he paused. Say something true, she told him, without a word. His jaw tightened. Someone put poison in your cup an hour ago, she said aloud. And you told me to swallow it and smile. Then you came straight down here in the dark to break open a strongbox and read the goddess's account books. So say it, Severin. Whatever it is, say it before I finish guessing. Because I am very close, and I would rather hear it from you. He set the ledgers down. When he spoke, his voice had gone gentle. The careful, even voice she'd heard him use on frightened councilmen, the one he had never once used on her. Hearing it turned on her now was worse than a slap. I've been hunting a thief for a year, he said. The supplies that never reach the march, the orders that contradict each other, the crown's coin bleeding out of the treasury a little at a time and never coming home. It runs north. Neva. It has always run north, past the treasury, past the lords, up the hill to the pale house where the bells hang. He met her eyes and did not look away. The men who've tried to kill me were bought with the goddess's silver. The rot in your march was cut on purpose, to hide the size of what was being moved. And the one signature on every diverted order, the one seal, no crown officer would ever dare question. He said it as gently as he could, and it landed like a mountain. is Vesna's. The floor went out from under her. No, she said. Neva. He said it low, steadying, and did not come closer. I have 3 years of ledgers. I have the assassin's pay drawn in temple script. I have stop. Her ears were ringing. You're wrong. She pulled me out of a snowbank. She gave me a name. She has never once, in 26 years, lied to. She stopped, because a cold and quiet thing had begun assembling itself underneath the noise, and she could not make it stop. You claimed the bond, she heard herself say from very far away. In front of the court, you swore it was real when I could feel you didn't want it. Why? He was silent. You needed someone close to her, Neva said. The pieces were falling now, one after another, and each one cut, someone inside the temple's reach, that no one would question. And the goddess handed you her own foundling in the middle of your own hall, insulting you to your face, and you thought, there. Bind her and watch her, and if the girl is the oracle's creature, I'll have the proof at my own side. Her voice cracked straight down the middle. You suspected me. At the start, he said. And then, fierce and low, stepping around the table, for exactly as long as it took me to think it through, Neva, you stood up in my own hall in front of 400 people and blamed the king for the march's dying. Vesna's creature would have steered every ounce of that blame anywhere but the crown, because the crown's ruin was the whole design. You blamed me, to my face. That's how I knew, that first day, that you weren't part of it. You're the one soul in this palace I cleared before I'd finished being furious with you. It was a good answer. That was the unbearable part. It was a good answer, and it did not touch the wound at all. Then why not tell me? Her tears had come, and she let them. You watched me put my own body between you and a bolt. You let me into the dark with you. The bond set tonight, Severin. I am tied to you for the rest of my life, and in all of it, you never once told me the truth. Why not me? Because I didn't think you'd believe me. His own voice had gone hoarse. Not against her. I didn't think you'd trust me enough to turn on the woman who raised you. On my word, with the moon barely warm between us. He drew a breath. And I was right, wasn't I? Look at you. You don't believe me now. The demand tore out of her. You suspected the oracle. For a year. You're the king. Why creep through strongboxes in the dark? Like a thief instead of putting her in a cell. Because being king doesn't make me untouchable. He said it wearily, as if he'd worn the thought smooth. Vesna doesn't hold an army, Neva. She holds the faith. Every wolf in Helveth learned the goddess's verses at her knee. The soldiers who'd arrest her, pray to her. If I dragged the high oracle of the moon out of her temple on a stack of ledgers and a hunch, half the kingdom would have called it a young king, murdering the goddess's own voice to seize her power, and the other half would have picked up a blade to stop me. There'd have been holy war in the streets by dawn, and she'd have died a martyr with my name on the knife. His jaw tightened. A tyrant jails whatever frightens him and wonders 3 years on why there's steel between his ribs. I couldn't move on her until I had proof so plain that not one faithful soul alive could call it a lie. I had to be certain. That's what the box was. That's what tonight was. It was a good answer. That was the trouble with him. He always had a good answer, and none of them reached the place that had actually broken. That struck true. And because it did, she reached past it for the older, deeper wound, the one that had waited her whole life, for exactly this. Men like you, she said, don't want women like me, not for ourselves. You wanted a sword you could trust close to the temples, girl. The moon made it easy, and you let me stand there and believe I'd been chosen. She wiped her face hard. A bond doesn't reach 60 years to land on a warden with one coat. It reached for a use. That is not. His hand came up, reaching for her face the way it had on the colonnade. Don't. She stepped back until her spine hit the door. Good night, Your Majesty. And she walked out into the dark of the corridor, with the truth, in pieces, behind her, and the set bond aching in her chest, like a wound that would never now be allowed to close. It was all a use. She dug the heels of both hands into her eyes until she saw sparks. Gods, she was stupid. 26 years of knowing better, and she'd let a king, with a sad, true smile, walk her straight off. The same cliff every fool walked off. Little wolf. The voice found her in the dark of the corridor, like a hand out of childhood. Vesna stood 10 paces off, small and silver and waiting, as if she had known exactly where Neva would break, and had come to be standing there when she did. And Neva, who should have been thinking, who should have been reading, went to her the way she'd gone to her, at 6 and 13 and every wounded year since. "Tell me," Vesna murmured, drawing her down onto a cold stone bench, thin arms around her. "Tell me what he's done." "He used the bond. It came out in pieces. He used me. To get at," he says. She couldn't make herself say the accusation to the accused's own face, and she was too broken to notice that was strange. "Hush." The oracle stroked her hair. "I know, child. I hoped to spare you this. I have known what he was since the night he claimed you." A long sigh. "And, I am afraid, it is worse than the using. Neva, look at me." The pale blind eye, steady in the dark. "He drugged the Princess Marin tonight. Torvale's daughter. Compromised her, so her father would have no choice but to sign the alliance on Severin's terms or see her ruined before the world. I saw it with my own eyes. Not an hour passed. And there, the falling stopped. Because Neva had spent an hour past with her hand knocking poison from the king's own fingers on a moonlit colonnade, and the hour before that inside his heart while the bond set. And there had not been a minute in it unaccounted for, not one, in which Severin could have gone near the Princess Marin at all. The timeline was wrong. The story was wrong. I saw it with my own eyes. From a woman with one eye, pale and blind, telling a tale that could not have happened, in a voice pitched exactly to a daughter's oldest ache. The cold, quiet thing finished assembling itself, and it had Vesna's name on it after all. She's lying to me. The woman who pulled her out of the snow was lying to her face, right now with her arms around her. And once Neva had seen the one lie, the others surfaced behind it like bodies coming up through spring ice. The too quick blessing in the receiving hall, a woman who'd arrived, prepared to burn a false bond, pronouncing it holy, before she'd fairly finished feeling it, because a bonded foundling could be aimed at a king, and a burned one couldn't. The coin she'd watched run north in Severin's ledgers up the hill to the pale house with the bells. The assassin's silver, struck with a mark no crown officer would dare to question. 26 years of the crown is careless, child. The crown forgets us, poured patiently into an orphan's ear until the orphan stood up in the king's own hall and said it for her, word for word, believing every syllable was her own. Neva had carried this woman's grievances in her own mouth for half her life and never once noticed they weren't hers, which meant Severin had told the truth. The stolen coin, the assassins paid in temple silver, all of it. Every word she'd called a use, an hour ago, in the dark, while she broke his heart to spare her own. Neva did not move. 26 years of a warden's discipline held her face still against her own breaking heart, and she made herself keep weeping, because the woman with her arms around her had already bought the deaths of a dozen men to reach this night, and must not, for a single heartbeat, catch Neva seeing her plainly at last. "What do we do?" she whispered into Vesna's shoulder, and let the words shake. The oracle's arms tightened, pleased. "We go to King Aldous before Severin can twist it. A king who would violate a man's daughter to buy an alliance is no king at all. The goddess herself would unmake him. Torvale will not stand for it. And there are good and faithful houses ready to steady Helveth once the boy is gone. Houses that remember. The temple is the elder power here and the crown its servant, as it was in the old days." She drew back and framed Neva's wet face in both dry hands, tender as ever. "But it cannot come from me, little wolf. I am the oracle. They will say I reach for the crown. It must come from someone no soul in that room could doubt." Her thumb stroked the tears away. It must come from you. His own bonded. If the woman the goddess tied to the king stands up and says she saw him do this thing, not one wolf in Helveth will question a single word. There it is, Neva thought, with a strange floating calm. That's why she blessed the bond so fast. Not to lift me up, to point me. And if I say no, the question stood up cold and clear. If she flinched now, if the tears stopped to beat too soon, the oracle would never let the only witness who knew leave this corridor breathing, so she would not flinch. She would play the ruined, obedient girl all the way into that council room, where even Vesna could not cut a throat in front of Torvale. And there, with nothing but the truth and her own two hands, she would turn the trap around. "All right, mother," she said, and made her voice small and ruined and obedient, the voice of the girl this woman had built to be useful. "Tell me what to say." They walked to the east wing together, arm in arm, and it was the longest walk of Neva's life. Somewhere ahead, behind a council room door, waited a grieving foreign king, a princess. She had to pray was safe, and the man she'd called a liar an hour ago and now had to save. One wrong word from either of them, and there would be holy war in the streets by dawn. Vesna squeezed her arm, sure of her. Neva squeezed back, and under her sleeve, felt for the knife she'd worn to a ball out of pure March habit, and was for the first time all night glad of the woman who'd taught her to always come armed. King Aldous of Torvale had taken the Great East Council Room, and it was full when they came in. His own guards along the walls, 3 graven-faced advisors, and the Princess Marin rigid in a chair. Awake, upright, untouched, Neva clocked in a single sweep, and something in her chest unlocked a fraction. And Severin, at the old king's right hand, looked up when the door opened, and his whole face lit for half a heartbeat before he saw whose arm Neva was on, and the light went out of him like a snuffed candle. He thought she had come to bury him. She saw the moment he decided to let her. "Your Majesty." Vesna's thin voice filled the room, heavy with sorrow. "It grieves me to bring this before you. But your daughter has been wronged this very night by the man at your right hand." She laid it out. The drug, the ruin, the alliance bought with a princess's shame. And the old king's face went gray, and Severin said, flat and clear, "Every word of that is a lie, and it is hers," and Aldous did not know whom to believe. Which was the entire design? "He would say so," Vesna murmured. "Of course he would." But the king's own bonded stood witness. She turned, and the whole room turned with her, to Neva by the door. She held out one dry hand. "Neva, little wolf. Tell His Majesty what you saw." Every face in the room swung to her. The foreign king, leaning forward, desperate. Vesna's advisors, already counting the throne as won. And Severin, who had not moved, who was looking at her the way a man looks at the blade, already falling, with no anger in it at all, only a terrible resignation, as if being betrayed by her was no more than he'd always expected the world to get around to. "I'm sorry," she told him with no words at all. "I should have believed you an hour ago. I believe you now." Then she turned to King Aldous. "I saw nothing of the kind," she said, "because it never happened. The High Oracle is lying to you." The room pulled tight as a drawn bow. Beside her, Vesna went rigid. "She says it happened within the hour," Neva went on, and her voice was the march, now level and carrying, the voice that gave orders on a wall in a killing wind. "But within the hour, the king was on the west colonnade, with me. The moon bond set between us tonight. Ask any wolf in this palace whether they felt it, whether the air changed at the full of the moon. A set bond does not lie, and it does not leave its bearers sight of each other for an hour to go ruining princesses. He never went near your daughter. Look at her. Majesty, she is unharmed, and she will tell you so herself." Marin, white-faced, said into the silence, "No one has touched me. I have been in this room since the dancing began." "This is grief," Vesna said, and her voice had not yet cracked. But Neva heard the first hairline in it. "The girl is bonded to him. Of course she defends him. It is the bond speaking. Then here is what the bond cannot speak, and I can. Neva's chin came up. There was mercy root in the king's wine tonight. I struck the cup from his hand on that colonnade, and the glass is still on the stones for anyone to find. Again and again this season, men have come for his life, paid in silver, struck with the temple's own mark. Search her quarters now, while she stands here and cannot reach them. Send Torvale's own guards, so none can cry the evidence was cooked, and see whether you find a wronged princess, or a paymaster's ledger, and poison, and the goddess's silver. Hysteria! Vesna snapped, and the crack ran all the way through this time, and every wolf in the room heard the grandmother's tenderness fall off the oracle like a dropped veil. You ungrateful, low-born! Then a search cost you nothing, said King Aldous quietly, and nodded to his guards, and Vesna ran. She was old, but she was fast, and she came not for the door but straight at Neva, because Neva was the witness. Neva was the proof. Neva was the girl she'd made and could not now unmake. And Neva saw the thin blade slide from the oracle's silver sleeve half a beat before it reached her. But this was the one thing in the whole wrecked night she knew how to do without thinking. She turned into the strike instead of away from it, caught the frail wrist, felt the old bones fight her and lose, and used the woman's own weight to fold her down and down until the high oracle of the moon lay face first on the cold stone with a warden's knee set between her shoulders. Neva leaned close to the silver ear. "You gave me a name, mother," she said very softly, for the two of them alone. "You should not have taught me it was worth keeping." They searched the temple quarters that same hour, Torvale's own men holding the lamps, and found all of it. A coffer of silver struck with the goddess's mark, a paymaster's ledger in the oracle's own hand with the names of dead assassins tallied against dates Neva could have recited from memory, and a vial of the same green mercy root that stained the colonnade stones below. King Aldous read 3 lines of the ledger, set it down very carefully, and looked at Severine like a king who has badly misjudged another and means to spend a long alliance making it right. Then Torvale's guards had the oracle up and away, and it was done, and the room was suddenly only breathing, and Severine, who had not moved through any of it, staring at her across the wreck of the night, as if he had never once in his life seen her before. "You saved me," he said, "even after you still. I came to stop a traitor." Neva got to her feet and did not go to him. "That is all I came to do." The light in his face guttered. "Neva, the bond is real. It's set tonight. You felt it. I know you did. It doesn't matter whether it's real." Her voice came out cold and steady, and it cost her everything she had. "I saved you because it was my duty and because she was a traitor. Not 1 second of it was forgiveness." She met his eyes. "You looked at me for weeks and used me. A bond doesn't undo that. Being tied to you for life doesn't undo that, Neva." He took a step, and the bond carried her the whole raw weight of him, love and terror and grief, with no mask left to hide behind. "I don't care how it started. I care what it became. You're the truest thing I have ever." "Don't." Every instinct she owned was screaming at her to close the space, to let the set bond do what set bonds were made to do. She had spent her whole life being useful to people who put her down when they were done, and she would not survive being put down by this one. You can say mate like it mends everything. It doesn't. You had weeks of the truth, and you spent them lying to my face. The moon can tie us together. It can't make me trust the knot. She turned for the door. "I'm glad you'll live. You'll make a good king. But I can't trust you, Severin. I don't know that I ever will again." And she saw it land in his face. The understanding that he had broken a thing that no right and no moon and no set bond could put back, before she walked out and left him standing in it. She was warden commander of the march within the month. Old Merrick, gone up to Lord Marshal at the king's own table, and his post come down to her, and she was good at it, and had always known she would be. The kingdom was a different country now. Vesna sat in a cell beneath the old fort, while the temple, she'd rotted from the inside, was cut clean, priest by priest and ledger by ledger, and the coin came home, and the march got its 40 rations in a winter for the first time in Neva's life. Severin had done all of it, quietly, and without once asking her to watch him do it. The city slowly had begun to love him for it. The boy king nobody had taken seriously, who had pulled a knife out of the heart of the faith itself and lived. He had also spent every one of those months trying to win her back. The flowers came first, a whole cart of them to the barracks yard, her own wardens grinning like fools to see what she'd do. The infirmary, she'd said, and the temple orphan house, every stem. He tried the war table next, where she stood twice a week over the troop counts, always across from him, and he'd catch her eye, and his whole face would do something hopeful and undefended, and she would look back down at the numbers until he stopped. The bond did not make it easier. Leave a set bond closed and it did not fade, it waited, a warm patient thread under her ribs that ached in the small hours, that carried her, when she was too tired to hold the wall up, the far-off shape of his sorrow, the twin of her own. She kept it shut and hoped it would learn to leave her be. He wrote to her, 2 and 3 letters a week in his own hand, some of them a single line, and some running for pages, and not all of them even about her. A posting sheet flagged, a pension dispute on the march, as though her plain honest opinion were still worth something to a crown. One said, only, I keep writing the same small word, every way I know how. Sorry, it is too little for what I did, and I do not own a bigger one, so I will keep sending the little one until it wears a path to you. Another, you told me I'd kept you near enough to trust with my life and not near enough to trust with the truth. You were right. I didn't earn your trust, Neva. I spent it. It is the worst thing I have done, and I have signed death warrants. And near the foot of a long page, she'd sworn she wouldn't finish. I don't want you back because you are useful to me. I have a kingdom full of useful people. I want you back because none of it means anything if you aren't the one I turn to tell. Tamsin and Bram had opinions, and the opinions moved over the months. Good, Tamsin said early. Make him crawl. You owe that man nothing. Then, later, tallying over her cards, he sorted the back pay out of his own purse. He named you commander, and let the council think it their idea. 40 letters north. And not once did he use the crown to make you answer one. 43, said Bram, who apparently counted, and would not meet her eye. I was used, Neva told them, and set down her pen too hard. I'm not queuing up for another turn at it. I'm a good commander. The march runs well. I'd like to be left in peace to run it. They let it go. But nobody at that table believed her, least of all herself, and the warm, patient thread under her ribs called her a liar every night she lay down alone. By the 5th month, even Merrick, who trusted kings the way he trusted spring ice, set down his cup one night and said, with respect, Commander, talk to the man. There's nothing to talk about. I was used. You were. And then you weren't, and you know the difference, or you'd have thrown his letters on the fire instead of keeping them in a box under your bunk. He held up a hand against her glare. You're miserable. He's miserable. And the rest of us have to stand in the cold between the two of you and pretend we can't feel it. He rose. You're the best tracker the march ever made. You can read the whole world, but the thing in your own chest, read it. She didn't answer him. But that was the night the pressure she'd been ignoring finally reached the throne itself. Because a king with no heir and a lowborn bonded, he refused to set aside, was a problem his council had run out of patience for. Torvale's alliance wanted sealing. There was a match in it, Marin, sensible and kind and royal, and a whole chamber of lords prepared to argue that the good of the realm required the king to have the temple, sever a bond he'd never chosen in the first place, and marry where it mattered. And Severin, who could feel the same trap closing on him that Neva had built for him a lifetime ago in the Hall of Reckonings, did not use her name to escape it. He had learned that much. He would not force her hand again, not even to save his own crown. And so, he was losing, quietly, an argument he refused to win at her expense. Bram brought her the word, gray-faced, at the turn of the 6th month. "They've called an open reckoning," he said tomorrow. "The lords mean to make him sever it in front of the whole court. Give up the bond, or give up the throne." He swallowed. "Commander, he's going to let them. He told the council he'd not drag you into it. He's going to stand there and lose everything sooner than ask you for a thing you didn't offer." Neva stood very still, and under her ribs, the warm, patient thread she'd spent 6 months trying to starve, gave one slow, certain pull, and she stopped, at last, trying to read it, and simply let herself feel what it had been telling her all along. "Wake the horses," she said. The Hall of Reckonings was full to the walls. When Neva came through the great doors, still in her riding leathers, snow melting off her shoulders, a warden commander of the march walking uninvited into the king's own justice for the 2nd time in her life. It was, near enough, the same argument. A ring of lords around the dais, and Severin at the center of it, and the words, "the good of the realm," and "set the bond aside," thick in the air. He stood exactly as she'd first seen him, and nothing at all like it. No lazy ease left in him now, no mask, just a young king with his chin up choosing to lose the thing that mattered rather than spend a woman to keep it. He was mid-sentence when the doors banged, and he turned and saw her, and forgot every word he'd ever known. "Warden, Commander." The Chancellor recovered first, stiff with outrage. "These proceedings are closed. You have no standing." "2. I have every standing there is." Neva did not stop walking. "You're arguing about a moon bond. I'm the other half of it. I think that entitles me to a word." "There's no way out of this argument that leaves him a king," a lord said coldly, and Neva almost laughed, because she had said very nearly that to Severine, on this floor, at the start of everything. "Either the bond is severed, and he weds where the realm needs it, or the warden commander of the march declines to be set aside," Neva said. "And I'd think hard, my lords, about whether you truly want to be the men who told the goddess her one bond in 60 years was an inconvenience." She reached the foot of the dais. Severin came down it, slowly, disbelieving, the whole court forgotten, the bond between them blazing open now, for the first time in 6 months, both ends at once, and she let him feel every furious, tender thing she'd been strangling since the night she walked out of the record room. "You'd have let them cut it," she said low, "for him. You'd have given up your crown before you'd ask me for anything. I'd used you once already." His voice was wrecked. "I wasn't going to buy my throne with you a second time." "Neva, what are you? You clever, exhausting man." Her own eyes had gone hot. "You've made me a trap. I can't win. Standing there being good at exactly the wrong moment. There's only one door out of it." She fisted her hand in the front of his coat, the way he'd once fisted his in the front of nothing at all, and hauled him down. "So, forgive me. It's the only one left." And Neva kissed the Alpha King of Halvith in front of the whole court to end the argument, because it was the one thing in all the world that could shut a room like this up. And the bond went silver bright between them, floor to roof, the way it had the first time, except that this time no one had forced it and no one blacked out, and she felt, pouring back and forth through the light, exactly whose choice it was. When she let him go, the hall was dead silent. 400 wolves, not breathing, and Severin's forehead came down to rest against hers, and he was laughing, and there was something wet in it. "You started all this. You realize," she murmured. "You kissed me to end an argument once, in this very hall. Consider us even." "It's set now," he said, unsteady, the silver still fading between them. "No unmaking it. You're stuck with me." "Good," she said, and felt the word land in him and felt him believe it, "because I'm not letting go of you, either." The moon didn't reach 60 years for a use. "Severin, I know that now. It reached for me." In the end, it took him 4 more months to get the words out sober and unforced, asking her badly and beautifully across the war table, until Tamsin threatened to resign in writing, asking on the north wall in a wind that turned his ears red, asking once with so many flowers the barracks smelled like a funeral for a week. And every day she told him to ask again tomorrow, until one perfectly ordinary morning, she looked at the man grinning hopefully over the troop counts and said yes. The whole city came out for it. The boy king no one had taken seriously, and the frontier warden, who'd seen the man under the smile before anyone else thought to look, he cried during the rites. She'd known he would. She very nearly didn't, and the bond gave her away anyway, and he laughed at her through his own tears until she stopped caring who saw. One might argue, following the thread all the way back, that none of it would have happened had the king simply governed his march properly and spared a furious woman the need to stand up in his hall and tell him so. Neva held, on principle, that the whole thing had been his fault from the first. He conceded the point cheerfully and forever. It was, they both agreed, the best mistake either of them ever made.